second versus first at the top of the Liga. Just 2 points separate these Spanish giants going into the clash. Not ideal preparation, though, of course, for Real Madrid going into the game, coming off the back of that defeat against Manchester City at home. Panic at the White House is the front page of Sport. I want to welcome in Sid Lowe to the show. Sid, how much does that headline ring true to actually how Real Madrid are feeling going into this game?
Well, look, Sport is a pro-Barcelona sports daily. The other big pro-Barcelona sports daily is El Mundo Deportivo, who today went with almost exactly the same headline. They went with white panic. And, of course, in part, this is wishful thinking from their point of view. But it's also about the response to the defeat against Manchester City, the fact that Real Madrid have dropped 5 points over the last 2 weeks in La Liga, and that sense that there is tension building. Not least, of course, because people remember what happened last year when Barcelona went to Real Madrid and beat them twice, knocked them out of the Copa del Rey, knocked them out of the league title race, and they were beaten by Ajax. All of that in the space of 8 days. And so there is this sense that, hang on, it's happening again. Zidane said last week, after the game against Levante, next week our entire season is at stake. Of course, that meant 2 games, City and Barcelona. They've already lost the City one, and now comes Barcelona. And it's that City defeat, I think, that has shifted the, if you like, the emotional balance going into this game. Where has the finger of blame been pointed, Sid, after that defeat, and how is that going to change things going into the weekend? Well, as I say, I mean, look, even on Monday, before that game, one of the headlines in one of the Madrid papers was talking about a psychosis, this sense of fear that the same thing as last year would happen again. And you thought, well, that's really exaggerated. But, of course, by Thursday morning, at which point they had been beaten by Man City, it didn't feel quite like that. Now, there's a finger of blame pointed at Zidane, not least, of course, the decision to leave out Toni Kroos. I think there's been a sense that they allowed themselves to collapse in the last 10 or 15 minutes. But I think the broader analysis, and obviously there's been some questions about the referee just because there always are. I think the broader analysis, though, has looked at this and thought, actually, City were probably the better side for maybe 70, 75 minutes of this game. And that has brought to the surface those doubts that are much deeper lying at Real Madrid about whether they're scoring enough goals, whether that defensive solidity we saw as recently as 2 or 3 weeks ago was actually based on something that perhaps wasn't as tangible as we wanted to believe, and that maybe Real Madrid are just not quite that good. Now, of course, the context of this, Dan, is that things aren't great at Barcelona either. Yeah, that's interesting, boys, isn't it? It's not the Clasico that has been a few years ago. We had 2 real top teams going head-to-head.
It's amazing how things change, though, isn't it? Because the whole thing at the Nou Camp was burning. You could smell the smoke like a month ago, and now the worm has turned. It seems like it's... I know there's still issues at Barcelona, I understand that, but it seems the pressure has shifted somewhat. To go back to the game in midweek, I think the bigger concern, and Sid touched on it, was the fact that even City, who kind of never really got out of second gear for a lot of the game, but whilst they had their foot on the neck of Real Madrid, really could have finished them off. I mean, 1 header in the first half from Benzema was all they could muster. I know it got a little better for them after they scored, and City were under pressure for a bit, but then they took hold again. And I just feel they're not able to control the game like the ones did. I mean, I suppose it was a Kroos or Modric thing during the week, because obviously the Casemiro, Modric and Kroos, there's not enough legs in there anymore, so young Valverde plays. And that's a big decision for him at the weekend. What does he do? Because he needs to try and get control of that middle of the park. That's what they did so well when they were very successful. What is he likely to do, Sid, regarding that 11? That's a very good question, because Zidane does have a habit of surprising us. And, you know, of course, you look at the midweek game and the inclusion of Vinicius. Maybe we saw that come in, but nobody saw the lack of Kroos being a probability. And so I think what he will probably try and do is reinforce the midfield. Looking at that lineup there on the screen, I think you would say that's perfectly plausible. It's also plausible that instead of Vinicius, it's Isco that goes in there to try and create what Craig was talking about, that control in midfield, the number of bodies in there, the players who can keep hold of the ball, which was what was so surprising about the absence of Kroos, because while it's true there are other good footballers in the team, he's the one that judges the pace of the game the best, that maybe doesn't kind of stand out, doesn't do really dramatic things, but gives them that degree of control that they lacked. And I think there are some very significant doubts. That's a perfectly plausible lineup. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we saw a variation which might be Isco instead of Vinicius, though. Does that work for you, Stevie? Adding an extra man in midfield?
Absolutely. I think that's a smart move. It's, you know, Sid was talking about, they said there's 2 games for the season and one's gone and they've lost it. They can't afford to just go gung-ho to the wind and open up. So playing 2 up front and keeping it with 4 in the middle, I think it's a smart move because Barcelona haven't been particularly strong in the middle of the park either. We know defensively they can be vulnerable, so it would make sense to be solid and then either hope that you can create, which you haven't done recently, or that they can make a mistake. I think that's a smart move. It would be.
Meanwhile, for Barcelona, Sid, they come into the game not exactly flying either. Craig mentioned the problems off the field, but also that game against Napoli was pretty boring.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? I mean, look, on one level, I suppose, and bear with me while I say this, because to start with, it might sound a little bit daft. I suppose on one level, given how poor Barcelona's away performances and results have been, I think I'm right in saying that it's only 2 victories in a knockout game away from home in 10 matches in the Champions League. You go away to Napoli, it's fairly dull. Apart from the moment when you got caught, though, you keep a certain degree of control. You get a 1-1 draw, and you probably think that's quite good. But yeah, absolutely. The response to this was, oof, this isn't very good. Napoli shouldn't be the strongest team in the Champions League. They should be a team that you can go away and beat. And that Barcelona lack the fluidity in the passing, they lack pace, they lack the ability to create chances. And that meant that on Tuesday night, there was a certain degree of pessimism, I think, in Barcelona about the Clasico. Of course, what changed it is exactly what we've just been talking about. Not so much a change at Barcelona, but a change on the other side of the divide.
How much does that play in the psyche of a player going into these big matches? Well, the fact that you get a draw against Napoli, people are critical of you, but then you see your opposition lose 24 hours later. Does that play its part at all in the locker room, in the preparation?
Do you know, I think from a player's point of view, I'm not quite sure it does.
Right.
You've still got to go and do the job. In some sense, it might have been better for them if they'd played well against Man City and beat them, and then were a little bit cocky about it. Whereas now, they're under a little bit of pressure, Real Madrid, from their coach and from their fans and from the media in that part of Spain. And they're now looking for a reaction. So it's a little bit of a kick up the backside for them to say, hold on a minute, you know, we got a bit of a doing there against Man City. We need to up our game, change tactics, change players. And I think that's what we'll see from Zidane.
Players are so used to forgetting about the last one and you're coming on to the next one. You know, if you talk to any coach, that's all they talk about. Like, that's behind us. This is the most important.
So players aren't thinking, as Sid mentioned, this time last year, when it all went wrong with the Barca defeats and Ajax as well. No. That doesn't play into their...
No, not at all, because when you're going into training, part of your job as a coach is to get everything bubbling and get everybody thinking about the next game and go through what you're going to do and all the positive stuff. So you kind of don't have a lot of time to think about the negatives. Because if you did, then that would be a problem. Players are used to just putting aside whether it's good or bad, because if it's good, they'll go, right, you don't get anything for the next game because you were great, so you're concentrating on what you have to do, regardless of the opposition, to win the game.
This is Quique Setien's first Clasico, of course, in charge of Barcelona. Sid, he hasn't made that much of a difference, really, has he?
Well, I don't know. I suppose let's start by saying, in what way do you want him to make a difference? In terms of the results, I think there hasn't been a huge difference, although, of course, we will never know how the results would have gone with Valverde. I think in terms of the way that they're trying to play, the style, the mechanisms, I think we are seeing a shift. I think we're seeing a shift which has both its good side and its bad side. And I think we're seeing greater control. I think we're seeing a team that is trying to win the ball back quicker than it did before, that's pressing that little bit higher. But then I don't think there's too much doubt that, for example, the first game against Granada, when it was over 1,000 passes, I think when you look in particular at the game in Napoli, there are people looking at that and saying, well, this is Setien. So the possession is all there, but for what? And I think there is that doubt about whether they have yet got, or whether they will ever get, the speed of that ball circulation, the ability to open up spaces, which makes that possession really, really worthwhile. Now, the possession is useful, I think, in terms of control and protecting an otherwise quite vulnerable defence, but it hasn't yet proven to be useful in terms of creativity.
Were you expecting the same starting 11, Sid, as the one that drew in Italy?
I think we're expecting something broadly the same for one very simple reason. They don't have any other players. I mean, they genuinely, they really don't have players. Barcelona, I think it's 15 first-team players available for this game. You look at that team sheet there, we have the doubt about PK. He did train today, so he may well start, in which case it'll be him with Umtiti or Longley rather than those two together. I think the midfield is very likely to be that free. There is a slight doubt about whether or not he plays Braithwaite up front or Ansu Fati in that Arturo Vidal role, but I think that a bit like Zidane, he may well be conscious of trying to have as many bodies as he possibly can in the middle of midfield.
Take a look at how the bookies have this set going into Sunday's game, and not really separating them by that much. Real Madrid with the home advantage. Favourites, Barca only 2-1 though to take all 3 points. Let's get some predictions. Sid, I seem to remember you predicted 2-2 for the last 17 Clásicos.
That is exactly right, and that is how I intend to proceed always. By the way, I can give you some stats though that are quite interesting in this game.
We'll be the judge of that.
You know. Yeah, OK. If Barcelona win this, it would be their 5th consecutive league victory at the Bernabeu. This is a place where they do go and win. They've won 8 of their last 11 at the Bernabeu. And it's not just Barcelona, by the way, because Quique Setién has been there 3 times as a coach, and he hasn't lost yet. So it's 2-2.
He's almost got him off the edge. Almost got him off. Nearly got him off the edge. It's a different... My head says... I could see Barca going there and winning, particularly with Messi when his 4 goals was against Eibar last week. But my heart says a response from Real Madrid. You know, behind in the league, poor against City, probably will make changes at home.
Yep.
I'm going to go for a response from Madrid, a Madrid win.
Madrid win, Stevie?
I don't like the look of Langley and Umtiti as a pair. I mean, even PK's not 100%. At least his influence would make a difference. So I'm going to say that Real Madrid don't lose.
Before we let you go, Sid, who's this game bigger for?
I guess it's bigger for Barcelona. Bigger for Real Madrid, if only because Barcelona have a 2-point cushion. In other words, obviously, you know, forgive me for stating the bleeding obvious, but if Madrid win, it's only 1 point. The league title isn't over. But I think if Barcelona to win and it goes open to 5 points plus head-to-head goal difference, which effectively makes it a 5.5-point lead because that can't be overturned with 12 games to go. I think Real Madrid, to take you back to that discourse we were talking about at the start, we're playing for our entire season. It's 2 games that we cannot afford to lose. They've already lost one of them. So I think in that sense, it's probably bigger for Madrid in terms of the obligation to go and win.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.